I was scrolling through an online forum the other day, just killing time, and stumbled across a post that stopped me cold. Someone was describing a train journey, a really specific detail about a long day of travel leading into an overnight ride. It was uncannily similar to a trip I took a few years ago, right down to the feeling of being utterly drained but finally settled. Reading their words brought it all back so vividly, and I realized I'd never actually told anyone the full story. The Wi-Fi was surprisingly good for being halfway across Pennsylvania. I was just scrolling through that travel forum again, the one with the thread about train journeys. It's stupid, I know, obsessing over it. But that post, it just wouldn't let me go. It wasn't the story itself, not really. It was the details. The guy, Dex, was describing a trip from Chicago to New York, same as mine last spring, and he mentioned the chipped formica on table 12 in car 3. I distinctly remember staring at that chip, trying to make shapes out of it. It was a weird thing to focus on, I admit. I was stressing about a work presentation, and that little piece of broken laminate just held my attention. I hadn't mentioned it to anyone. It wasn't something you would mention. Then Dex wrote about the woman with the bright orange scarf who kept rearranging her books. I remembered her too. She had a whole stack of vintage paperbacks, and every few minutes she'd pull one out, flip through it, then put it back. I'd thought she was nervous about something. Okay, coincidence, right? A common train, common observations, lots of people probably noticed chipped formica. But then he mentioned the guy sketching in a Moleskine, the one with the ridiculous handlebar mustache. I remember thinking he looked like a silent film villain, and Dex said he was sketching a church. St. Michael's in Scranton. That's where the train stopped for 15 minutes. I'd walked to the window to stretch my legs, specifically because I saw the steeple. It was probably a popular subject for artists or something. Scranton is a pretty old city. Maybe there's a whole online community of train travelers sharing observations. That had to be it. Still, it felt wrong. Like someone was watching me watch those things. The chipped formica on table 7. I remembered staring at it, tracing the hairline cracks with my finger while the train rattled past Wilkes-Barre. It was stupid, just something to do. But Dex had mentioned it, not just that there was a chipped table, but the specific pattern of the damage, like he'd been right there, doing the same thing. I checked the forum again, scrolling through Dex's posts. There was a new one, dated yesterday. A picture of a diner. Best coffee in Harrisburg, the caption read, and then a line that made my stomach drop. Always order the blueberry pancakes. You know how it is. I always order the blueberry pancakes at that diner. It's a habit, a ridiculous, pointless habit. I hadn't mentioned it to anyone, not even Lena. I hadn't even thought about mentioning it. The train pulled into Harrisburg. I usually walk straight through the station, out to the platform for the connecting line. But something felt off. I circled around, pretended to check the departure board just to see, and there he was. Dex standing by the newsstand, looking not at me exactly, but in my general direction. He was wearing a baseball cap pulled low, but I'd recognize that build anywhere. He was talking to someone, a woman with bright red hair, Irene maybe? I couldn't hear what they were saying, but they both glanced over at me at the same time. It was too coordinated. Okay, this was a weird coincidence. A dedicated rail fan. Maybe someone who just happened to be on the same trains, noticing the same things. It was unsettling, sure, but probably harmless. I decided to take the long way around, through the station's waiting area, hoping to lose them in the crowd. I needed to get to the other platform. I needed a coffee. Blueberry pancakes could wait. The coffee line was long, ridiculously long for 7:30 a.m. I kept glancing back, scanning the waiting area. No sign of Dex or Irene. Maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe it was just a weird coincidence. I ordered a black coffee. Extra sugar, the way I always do when I'm stressed. The barista, a young guy with a sleeve of tattoos, barely looked at me. That will be $2.75. I fumbled for my wallet, and that's when I saw her, Irene. Not looking at me exactly. She was talking to a man in a dark suit, Vince, I think, but her head kept drifting, like she was checking something in her peripheral vision, and every time it drifted, it was in my direction. Then Vince said something that stopped me cold. He didn't look at me either, just spoke, low and even. He always takes 2 sugars, even when he says he doesn't need them. My hand froze midair, the bills still clutched in my fingers. How? I hadn't told anyone that. It's a stupid little thing, a habit. I usually try to cut back, but mornings like this, I grabbed my coffee and practically bolted, not toward the platform but out the main station doors onto Market Street. It was a terrible idea. I knew that. I'd have to loop all the way around, adding 20 minutes to the commute, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being dissected, like they were cataloging every little quirk. I started walking fast, then jogging. A bus almost hit me as I crossed against the light. I didn't even register it. I just kept moving. Then I realized my bag was lighter, too light, my laptop. I'd left my laptop on the Formica table, right next to the half-finished coffee. It wasn't about the laptop, though. It was about them knowing I'd left it. I went straight home, obviously. I locked the door and checked the windows. I felt ridiculous, honestly, like I was in some bad movie. But the laptop, that wasn't just a coincidence. I called the police using the non-emergency line. I explained it away as a possible theft, a weird encounter. I downplayed everything. I didn't want to sound crazy. They took a report and said they'd review station security footage. Then I remembered the ferry, the trip to Orcas Island last spring. I'd been sketching in my notebook a little cove, the way the light hit the water. I'd ordered a black coffee with no sugar, just like at the station. I hadn't told anyone about that sketch. I hadn't even shown anyone. It was just me, a private moment. That's when the real panic set in. I started digging. I looked through old emails and social media. I searched for anything that might connect me to Vince or Irene. There was nothing. No mutual friends, no shared groups, no mentions. It was like they'd materialized out of thin air. I thought maybe it was some kind of targeted ad campaign gone wrong. Some hyper-personalized marketing thing that had gotten way too invasive. It felt flimsy, even as I told myself it. 1 week later, the local news had a story. It was a small piece near the bottom of the broadcast. A fishing boat had gone down near Orcas Island due to a sudden squall. 3 people were missing. The photo was a group shot of tourists, and there in the background, slightly blurred, was a man. It was Vince. He wasn't listed as one of the missing. He was with another woman, someone I didn't recognize, and Irene. They were all standing near the ferry terminal. The report said the boat hadn't been properly registered. It was operating illegally, offering unsanctioned wildlife tours. And then, a detail. The boat's captain was known for taking clients to a restricted area, a privately owned island, a place locals called the Collector's Reach. It's been years. I still check the news, not for them specifically, but for anything about Orcas Island. Anything about unusual disappearances, anything about the Collector's Reach. There's never anything that's worse. I stopped looking at photos of the island, too. They just felt wrong, like looking at a place that wasn't meant to be seen. I reported it, of course. The boat, Vince, Irene. The police were polite but dismissive. A rogue operator, a tragic accident. They said the island was privately owned, a conservation project. Access was restricted for a reason. I tried to explain what Vince and Irene knew about me, but it sounded ridiculous even to my own ears. A coincidence, they said. An unsettling one, maybe, but a coincidence nonetheless. I started to think I'd imagined the whole thing. Stress, lack of sleep. The city gets to you. I leaned into work, tried to bury it. I even started taking the train again. It was the most efficient route, but I always sat facing forward, always. Dex, a new guy in accounting, mentioned he was planning a trip to the San Juans. He asked if I'd ever been. I almost choked. I just mumbled something about it being crowded. He didn't push. He just said Irene had recommended a kayaking tour. Irene, it wasn't a coincidence. It was organized, some kind of elaborate, twisted game. They were testing me, seeing how I'd react. I haven't taken a shortcut through the park in years. It used to be my regular route home. Now, I walk the long way around, even when it's raining. I just can't shake the feeling that if I do, I'll see that same quality of light filtering through the trees. The way it looked that afternoon at the station. The way it made everything seem wrong. Just for a second, the shadows stretch a little too long, and the leaves aren't rustling, they're whispering. No, Just leaves, just the wind. I was 23, freshly out of school, and trying to make a go of things in the city. The job wasn't glamorous, mostly data entry for a firm downtown, but it paid the bills and let me keep my little apartment. The biggest downside was the commute. A long ride each way, but manageable if I caught the earlier trains. I quickly learned, though, that the last train home wasn't popular, and often left me waiting alone on a quiet platform. The train was mostly empty, like always. Just the rhythmic clatter and the hum of the lights. I was scrolling through emails trying to get ahead for the next day when Lyle reappeared. Not on the platform this time. He was already in the car, a few rows ahead, facing forward. He didn't look up. He didn't acknowledge me at all. Just sat there. It wasn't the seeing him again that got to me. Not exactly. It was how quickly he'd materialized. 1 minute I was the only one waiting, checking the time, and the next he was already settled in. The doors hadn't even been open that long. I must have just missed him rushing on. It was a crowded station earlier, easy to lose someone in the flow. He turned then, slowly, and gave me this small smile. Not a welcoming smile, not exactly, more like recognition. He shifted over, leaving the seat beside him empty, and then he said, "Good to see you, Jasper. Long ride home." I didn't say anything, just kept scrolling, pretending to be absorbed. He was talking to me like we were acquaintances, which technically we were, briefly. 20 years ago, Camp Hemlock, it felt ridiculous to even think about. After a few minutes, he spoke again, quiet enough that I almost didn't hear him. "They're doing some track work near Pell Station. Might be a delay." How did he know that? The conductor hadn't announced anything. I glanced at the digital display, still showing on time. I figured he must have overheard something, maybe on his phone. People always talk loudly on these trains. He was probably just trying to be helpful, acting like a concerned fellow commuter. It was odd, though, and the way he kept glancing back, not directly at me, but in my general direction, like he was making sure I was still there. I pulled my scarf up a little higher. The train pulled into Northwood Station, and I braced myself for the usual surge of people. It didn't come. A few got off, mostly students, but nobody got on. Then I saw him, Jasper, standing on the platform, leaning against a pillar. He gave a small wave. My stomach dropped. What was he doing here? Northwood isn't anywhere near his side of the city. I hadn't seen Jasper since everything with Bea ended. That was nearly 10 years ago. He'd been close to her, before me, before it all fell apart. I quickly looked away, pretending to be absorbed in my phone. The doors closed and the train started moving again. I risked another glance. Jasper wasn't on the platform anymore. Relief, sharp and immediate, flooded me. I must have imagined it. Stress, probably. It's late. I'm tired. People look alike. But then 2 stops later, as we were approaching Elmhurst, I saw him again, through the window, walking alongside the tracks, keeping pace with the train. He wasn't running, just walking, and he was looking directly at our carriage. I shifted to the other side of the seat. Maybe he was just heading to the next station. Elmhurst is a transfer point, but it felt deliberate. I started mentally planning a different route home tomorrow. The bus, maybe, even if it took twice as long, anything to avoid this. I pulled my coat tighter. It was warm on the train, but I was suddenly freezing. Then, the train slowed unexpectedly. Not a scheduled stop. The conductor's voice crackled over the intercom. Technical difficulties, brief delay. I looked out the window again. Jasper was gone, but the feeling of being watched hadn't left. It had somehow gotten worse. The lights flickered again, and this time they stayed off. Complete darkness. A collective gasp went through the car. Then the emergency lights kicked in, that sickly yellow glow, and a murmur of frustration. I craned my neck, trying to see out the window, but the darkness outside was absolute. It felt different than just a power outage, more contained, like we were in a bubble of wrongness. And then I saw him, Jasper, standing on the embankment, illuminated briefly by the train's emergency lights. He wasn't looking at the train. He was looking at me, directly at me. He wasn't walking alongside it anymore. He was just standing there, waiting. It wasn't possible we'd gone miles. The doors hissed open. The conductor, Pell, was shouting something about needing to assess the damage. People started to get off. Cautiously, I stayed put, frozen. Pell walked past my seat, his face grim. "Everyone off, please. It's the safest thing to do." Safest. It felt like walking into a trap. But the alternative, staying on this train with Jasper somewhere outside in the dark, felt worse. I stood up slowly and followed the others. As I stepped onto the gravel, I saw him move, not towards the train, but around it, cutting us off. I think he was trying to hurt us, direct us. It was a weird thought. Maybe he worked for the railway? Some kind of security? It didn't make sense, but it was the only explanation that didn't feel terrifying. Then, a shout from Bia, a woman a few rows ahead of me. "He's blocking the path. That man is blocking the road." I turned, and Jasper was there, standing directly in the only way back to the station. Not aggressively, not even threateningly, just there, smiling. And I remembered the diner, the chipped formica, the smell of stale coffee, the way he used to just appear. It wasn't a coincidence, none of it. A car horn blared. A beat-up pickup truck, driven by a man I hadn't seen before, forced its way past Jasper, tires spitting gravel. The rest of us surged forward, scrambling onto the road. I didn't look back, didn't dare. I ran, and as I ran, I felt something snag on my coat. A small, folded piece of paper. The paper was damp, folded so small it felt like a dried leaf. I unfolded it with numb fingers, expecting, I don't know what. A threat? Instructions? It was just a name, Lyle. Written in that same precise looping script, Lyle. My stomach dropped. Not Lyle. It couldn't be. Not after all this time. Lyle and I went to school together. A long time ago. He was intense, focused, always watching. I deliberately lost touch, changed my number, everything, after things got weird. Just a creeping feeling, like he wanted to know too much, like he saw something in me I didn't even recognize. I hadn't thought about him in years. Not really. I showed Bia the name. She frowned. Never heard of him. Is he the guy on the train? Jasper? No, Lyle is different. He was connected. He knew my family. He knew things. I remembered his father owned that antique shop in Oakhaven, the one with all the clocks. That's where I'd always bump into him. He'd always be there. We walked into the tiny police station in the next town. It smelled like stale coffee and disinfectant. I told the officer, a man named Vince, about the train, about Jasper, about the paper, and about Lyle. Vince listened, mostly with his eyes on the computer screen. "And you think this Lyle is connected to all this?" he asked, finally. "I don't know what to think," I said, running a hand through my hair. He just appeared after all this time. It's like someone knew exactly who to bring up. Vince shrugged. Could be a coincidence. People run into old acquaintances all the time. He took my statement, a perfunctory process. "We'll look into it," he said, without meeting my eyes. I felt dismissed. It wasn't a random encounter. Lyle wasn't a coincidence. Someone was orchestrating this. I realized with a chilling certainty that whoever stopped the train wasn't just trying to inconvenience us. They were trying to send me a message, and Lyle was the messenger. It had to be about something that happened back then, something I'd forgotten, or maybe deliberately buried, something Lyle hadn't. I kept replaying the station attendant's face, Lyle's face, the way he'd known about my grandmother, about the shop. It wasn't just small-town gossip. He'd mentioned the cuckoo clock, the one with the chipped bird. No one knew about that chip, not even Bia. He hadn't asked how I knew things, just stated them, as if confirming something he already understood. The police hadn't followed up. Vince hadn't even bothered to call. I went back to BA's and slept maybe 3 hours. She kept asking what was wrong, and I kept saying just a bad feeling, a weird travel day. I didn't want to drag her into it. It felt personal, embarrassingly so, like a forgotten embarrassment resurfacing. I started avoiding the train station, taking buses, which were slower and more crowded. but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I thought maybe Lyle was following me, that it had escalated. I started looking for him in crowds, scanning faces. I even considered getting a restraining order, but against what? A creepy feeling? A few unsettling comments. Then, 1 week later, a package arrived. It had no return address. Inside was a single, tarnished key. It was old, like something from the shop. I almost threw it away. I thought it was some kind of sick joke, a continuation of whatever Lyle was trying to do. But then I remembered my Uncle Walt had mentioned a safety deposit box, something my grandmother had, something he'd never gotten around to checking. I thought, maybe, just maybe, Lyle was trying to help. It was a clumsy, unsettling way to go about it, but help nonetheless. Now, before I agree to anything, even a coffee date with someone new, I ask them about their childhood. Sounds ridiculous, I know. I ask about their grandparents, their towns, their clocks. It's a stupid little test. It's cost me a few potential friendships, a couple of dates that fizzled before they started, but it's worth it. The sunlight through the kitchen window this morning fell across the countertop in a way that made the dust motes look deliberate, like tiny swirling eyes. I blinked. Just dust, just light. It was the kind of place people just pass through. A massive, echoing hall built for movement, always full of people going somewhere else. I ended up spending a lot of time in stations like that one. Actually, my work took me all over, visiting different sites, checking on progress. This particular station felt old, worn smooth by decades of travelers and their luggage, but it was mostly just neutral. The train to Bridgeport at 7:15 was delayed. Again. I pulled out my laptop, trying to get ahead on the Henderson report. The station was quieter than usual, even for a Tuesday morning. Usually, the newsstand is a hive of activity. People grabbing papers, coffee, and last-minute snacks, but it was dark. Not closed dark, like the metal grate was down, but empty dark. Like someone had just walked away mid-shift. I remembered thinking it was odd. Prue was usually there. She always had a little crossword puzzle going, even while ringing people up. I checked my watch. It was 7:20. She was always punctual. I figured maybe she called out sick. That happens. I asked the woman at the coffee stand if she'd seen Prue. Prue? Oh, she's around, the woman said, wiping down the counter with a distracted air. Probably in the back. But there was no back room. Just a small storage closet for supplies. I went to the information booth, but the attendant there hadn't seen her either. They just shrugged and pointed me towards station security. Security was useless. She probably just stepped out, the guard said, barely looking up from his phone. We're short-staffed. Things happen. It felt wrong. Prue didn't step out. She'd tell someone. She was meticulous like that. I finally got my train called, and honestly, I was relieved to leave. I just assumed she had a family emergency, something personal. It wasn't my business, but as I settled into my seat, I couldn't shake the feeling of something off. It wasn't just Prue being absent, it was how no one seemed to notice she was absent. Or if they did, how easily they dismissed it. The train was packed, but I managed to get a window seat. I tried to work, prepping for the presentation, but kept replaying the whole thing with Prue in my head. It was stupid. She probably just called in sick. People do. But the way Hector just waved it off, like she was always missing a shift here and there, it didn't sit right. I started taking the long way around the station on subsequent trips, just checking. It sounds ridiculous even saying it. I'd walk past her newsstand, even when it meant adding 15 minutes to my commute. It was always empty, always. And the other vendors wouldn't meet my eye. They'd just look past me. Then I noticed something else. A small, chipped ceramic dog. It was always on the corner of Prue's counter, next to the lottery tickets. A goofy-looking pug. I hadn't thought much of it before, but one morning, it was gone. I asked Rand, the guy who runs the coffee stand next door. Prue take it home? I asked. He just shrugged and started wiping down the counter with unnecessary force. A few days later, it was back, but it wasn't on the counter. It was tucked between the magazines, almost hidden. I distinctly remember thinking, maybe she just moved it for cleaning. Maybe I was being paranoid. Then last week, I saw someone near her stand. Just for a moment. A man, older, with graying hair, wearing a dark coat. He wasn't browsing, he was adjusting something. I couldn't see what. When I looked again, he was gone. I asked Val, who works security, if she'd seen anyone. She said she hadn't been patrolling that area, but she said it with the same blank look Hector had. I started taking a different train altogether, one that leaves from a different platform, further away. It adds almost 60 minutes to my commute. But I figured if this guy was watching, if he knew my routine, I needed to change it. I needed to make myself unpredictable. The new train was worse, honestly. More crowded, smelled like old coffee. But I felt safer, less exposed. I still scanned faces, though, every single one, and I kept expecting to see him. The man from near Prue's stand. It had been 3 days since I'd seen him, and that was worse than seeing him every day. Like he was letting me relax, then planning something. I was grabbing a coffee, waiting for my connection at Grand Central, when I heard it, a humming. Not electrical, not the station's usual rumble. It was a tune, faint, tinny like a music box, and it was coming from inside the newsstand Prue used to run, the one they hadn't reopened yet. It was boarded up, right? I remembered Val saying something about structural issues, but the humming, it was definitely coming from within, and it wasn't random. It was Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. My grandmother used to play that on a music box for me. I hadn't thought about that in years. I stopped, frozen. People jostled past. A woman with a stroller glared. I leaned closer, pressing my ear against the plywood. The humming stopped, then a scraping sound, like something being dragged across the floor. I backed away, fast. Maybe they were doing repairs, maybe it was a worker. But why a music box and why that song? I kept backing up, bumping into a man carrying a briefcase. He didn't even look at me, just muttered something and walked on. Then I noticed Ray, one of the other vendors, watching me. She wasn't selling anything, just watching. Her face was pale. She quickly looked away when I met her eyes, and then she started frantically rearranging her scarves, like she was trying to hide something. I just walked. I walked as fast as I could towards my train. I didn't stop until I was on the platform, heart hammering. It was probably just maintenance. It had to be. I called the transit authority. It wasn't about a threat. Exactly. More like a concern. It was about the newsstand and about Prue. I explained she'd retired, which was a lie, but easier than trying to explain the boarded-up windows and the music. I asked if they'd done any inspections, any safety checks. The woman on the phone, Connie, sounded bored. She said they'd noted the closure and assumed it was routine. They hadn't bothered to look inside. Then I asked about the vendor spaces, if they kept records of who'd worked each one. Connie sighed, a long, drawn-out sigh. She put me on hold, and I could hear her typing, the clicking echoing in my ear. Finally, she came back. "Okay, sir. The space was held by Prudence Bellwether. She'd been there a long time. 32 years, actually. Before that, it was vacant for almost a year. Then, before that, it was Silas Blackwood from 1958 to 1967. 1958. That felt wrong. My grandfather used to take me to that station when I was a kid. I remembered Prue. I remembered her vividly. It couldn't have been that long ago. I started digging through old family photos when I got home. There was one faded and creased of me and my grandfather. In the background, blurry but definitely there, was the newsstand. And behind the counter, a man, not Prue, a man with a hat. But it wasn't a clear enough image to make out his face. I took photos of the boarded-up newsstand, every inch of it. I wanted proof. I uploaded them to a cloud drive and backed them up to a hard drive. I even made a detailed log, dates, times, everything I'd noticed. It felt empowering somehow, like I was taking control, like I was building a case. I was going to show someone, anyone, that something was deeply unsettling about that spot. Then, yesterday, I noticed the cloud drive was empty. The hard drive, too, completely wiped. And the log? Gone from my computer. Just gone. It wasn't a virus. I checked. It was like someone had deliberately surgically removed any record of my investigation. I saw Jerome at the station today. He just looked at me, a small smile playing on his lips, and said, "Lost something?" It's funny the things you start doing without realizing. I mean, I always locked my doors, always. But after everything with Jerome, it's different. It's not about burglars anymore. It's about making sure there isn't already someone inside. I was in Portland last month for a conference, a perfectly ordinary hotel room. But the first thing I did, before even dropping my bag, was check the closet, every bathroom, under the bed. I even pulled back the shower curtain, half expecting, I don't know what, just something. It's ridiculous. I know. I'd tell myself that, rationalize it, probably stress from work, that's all, a weird little fixation. But it's not just hotels. I rented a cabin up in the Catskills a few weeks ago. A beautiful place, secluded. I spent 10 minutes checking the attic hatch, making sure it was bolted shut. It was, but still. I started thinking maybe Jerome wasn't alone. Maybe he was part of some, I don't know, a firm, a private investigation agency that specializes in what? Discreet background checks? It sounded insane even to me, but it was the only thing that made any sense. Someone was paying attention. Someone was meticulously collecting information, and they were letting Jerome be the messenger. I keep replaying that day at the station. He knew about my Aunt Rosie's porcelain dolls. He mentioned a fight I had with my brother Rand over a stupid board game when we were kids. Details no one could have known. I've spent hours combing through old social media, looking for any connection, any shared acquaintance. Nothing. I was at a diner this morning, waiting for coffee, and I saw a man sitting across from me, just looking, not staring exactly, just observing. He didn't say anything. He didn't do anything, but I found myself checking the emergency exit, calculating the fastest route out. And then I wondered how long he had been there.